Good afternoon, everybody. Mark Westcott here with Juanita Maiden again. Hi, Juanita. How are you going?
Hi, Mark. Very well. How is everyone?
Well, I hope they're all good because we are, and soon the borders will be open. We hope.
Indeed.
So, hey, look, I just wanted to start off today, if I may. I got an email this week from an anonymous person, let's say from New South Wales. It's the biggest state, so we'll say that. So do you mind if I just read this email? And I just want to spend a minute on this. I am the daughter of a third generation farming setup who returned to the area in my 20s with my farming husband. Now in our early 40s, we have bought our own farm and established our own successful contracting business. It was always presumed my brother would take over everything on the family farm. My sister and I have had to push to be featured in the will in any form, and he has run the entire process of succession, trying to keep us all out of it. That's the brother. He now continues to use the home block and my parents as backing, guarantors, to finance his empire building, and he's buying farm after farm, leveraged off mum and dad's block. We would like to expand our farm to improve our economy of scale, but can't get enough backing behind us. It's frustrating and has already created friction. We were all good mates in our early 20s, but now we really struggle to meet up for family occasions. It's sad already, and no one's even died yet. That was an email I received yesterday or the day before. And,
yeah, wow.
It just broke my heart. And yet I've had two more conversations in the last 24 hours in regard to situations which were pretty much exactly the same. What causes this, Juanita? What do you think causes this friction in families?
I think at the very start, a lack of communication, a lack of communicating expectations and desires for the future, and having those sort of discussions within the family generation, because it may be well that the different generations don't even know what the other are thinking, the different family members in that example you gave. So I think at the very heart of it comes back to communication.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And as you know, I did some research a year ago, and I looked back over all our clients over the last 3-4 years, and the common thing wasn't the succession planning wasn't the primary issue with the families. It was it was the result, but the primary issues with every family but one in those last 5 years was family conflict, communication issues, and caused mainly by communication issues. And I was just talking to you before we started about another family I know where 3 boys, mum, dad, 3 boys, and a lot of money involved in the value of the properties and so on. And they're trying to help one of the boys because they need someone to come, and they're at a stage where they want to retire. They want one of the boys to come back on the farm, so they're giving him an absolute leg up, which is fine to a point. But it's all being done without proper tax, legal advice and succession planning advice. And it's drawn an absolute chasm between all the siblings. And once again, no one's, very much like that letter I got, no one's died, but now the brothers aren't talking to each other. And it's just when mum and dad die, it's going to be a dogfight.
It's probably going to get worse.
One and all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, even before mum and dad die, it's going to get worse, and there's going to be some real issues. So
we often talk about how a lot of these situations we see go so pear-shaped after one's death. But the examples you're giving there just show it can be even more pear-shaped and sad. When people are still alive and when things haven't been handled as best they could. No one's perfect, but in those situations, there's ways that you can get support.
Well, I'll touch on another one. So Leanne and I did a webinar yesterday, and one of the people we talked to following up from that webinar, interesting, 4 kids, 2 working on the farm, and the marriages now playing into creating absolute tension between all the kids. You know, one of the kids, and I mean, I'll just say this because you don't know who I'm talking about, but one of the kids is married to a narcissist. The son with her now has 3 children. The daughter-in-law won't let the kids see mum and the grandparents or their cousins, and it's just, you know, it's just control games and all this sort of stuff. But it's creating real issues in regard to conflict between not just the generations, but between the siblings as well. And what was really uncovered, which is why I'm glad we do what we do, was that there was no testamentary trusts involved in any of the wills that mum and dad have. And, you know, when you've got issues where you're concerned about if mum and dad were to be hit by the bus last night, so to speak, and you don't want money to go to one of the sons-in-law, daughters-in-law or whatever, this is the sort of planning that's so valuable, so necessary, and a lot of, you know, these people have been to 2 lawyers in the last 10 years, and neither of the lawyers have put testamentary trusts in the estate planning process, knowing that there's a real issue that, you know, potentially the son and this daughter-in-law, they're going to split at some stage and potentially take a whole slice of the family pie with her. So all these issues about protection and so on. And look, I created a, you know, this probably leads perfectly into what we were going to talk about today, and that's a tool, a scorecard I created some time ago called the Intergenerational Conflict Matrix. And I just want to go through each of these 8 topics here. I had to count them. I couldn't remember how many questions I'd put down quickly. 2, 4, 6, 8.
Correct.
But look, the first one. So let's just talk about this while we're here today. I think this is a worthwhile conversation because, and people that are watching this, I urge you just on a piece of paper or whatever, just score yourself for each of these eight questions. You know, on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 to 12. So you know, 1 to 3 bad, 4 to 6 is fair. If you think you're in a good position, maybe 7 to 9 you'd give yourself, and if you think you've absolutely nailed this, somewhere between a 10 and a 12 points for each of the questions. So the first one is, if you can't see the screen properly, the first one is family generational communication issues, which is what we're talking about. Description is the level of conversation and openness between the generations, the willingness to discuss the issues around estate and succession plans between the parents and the children, and all the people I'm talking about so far today are going to get a 1. But what thoughts?
Yeah.
You've had a look at this, Vanita. Tell me your thoughts on this.
I think, to be fair, there wouldn't be too many families that would mark themselves in the excellent column from my experience. You know, we've spoken about the importance of opening this communication before, and that yes, we get it's not on the top of everyone's favorite dinner table conversation, and you know, having a chat about these sort of things socially, but it is just certainly so important just to get that communication started. The more the better, and it just helps the process and helps a lot of issues get resolved or prevented.
Look, absolutely, and even, you know, in the past when I've seen families where they'll say they do have these conversations with the kids, it's one of those areas where, and I'm not saying this to push what I do, but the fact of the matter is, if mum and dad are leading the conversation with the kids, as much as they may make some comments and contributions and so on, there's going to be a lot of times they're just sitting quietly in the corner, not saying what they really think, at fear of offending mum and dad. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I suppose that comes with some life experiences too, but maybe fearful of what they think, or not wanting to upset the apple cart or speak in front of their siblings. But I think, do you find, Mark, that often the older generation finds it difficult to speaking about these things too, just because of the way they've been brought up, through no bad reason, but often again it's probably not something that they spoke about with their parents, and it's a bit of a flow-on effect. It's a new concept as such with this generation.
Yeah, it's genetic. It's genetically transferred. The grandparents didn't talk about it, so now the parents aren't used to having that sort of open conversation with people. And there's absolutely no doubt that the levels of communication these days between people is much higher than it used to be. People used to just sit back and the other thing is too, it can be seen as having expectation or entitlement. If you start talking about this as a child to the parent, it can be seen that they're coming to the parent saying, well, what am I going to get out of this? Whereas really the intention on all parties is about gratitude. But you're absolutely right. It's just one of those things that maybe the generation that are at that stage where they're looking at handing down to the kids just aren't used to having this sort of conversation. And I guess that's where people like us facilitating the process is so valuable, because I've always found you can't solve these problems from within the family. You've got to get someone from the outside to have individual chats with mum and dad first, then each of the kids. And I always find out the truth. Kids to me, and by kids I mean they can be 40 or 50 years of age, but I mean kids to me always turn up with manners and truth, and that doesn't always happen in family meetings. But enough on that. Let's go through to number 2. The second one is a communicated plan for business ownership, and this is going a bit deeper. And I guess this is saying, let's talk about from a communication point of view, what's the level to which a fully documented and discussed plan for the transition of the business between the generations has been established. And I've referred to this as finding a unicorn before, but what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think particularly, there's so many aspects to this, particularly when not all children are involved in the business. That adds another layer of complexity. Sometimes it might be that children don't know if they want to stay in the family business forever, but they want to give it a go. So, that time frame needs to be accounted for, and how people feel about that. I think it's often the case that the child will come in and work in the business, but there isn't that real nitty-gritty conversation as to what that means, as far as when and in what process and how much it will cost, and to get more involved in that business. So yes, definitely it's a particular type of conversation that's very relevant when you have that family business.
Look, there's I was just thinking as you were talking, which I shouldn't have done. I should have just been listening to you, but I was thinking ahead and thinking a lot of these issues too, when you think about it, parents, especially on grazing farms, grazing properties, farms, whatever, most of them want to die with their boots on, don't they? So they're not in a hurry to hand the farm over. So they probably don't discuss a transition plan because they don't know how to start the conversation and all those reasons, but maybe they're just not ready, and they're just hoping that they can stay there longer and longer and longer, and the sons or daughters, whatever, will just, dutifully sit back and hang about, waiting for one day, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And what does it mean for the child that wants to stay in the business? What do they need to prepare for and put themselves in the position to be able to transition? But probably more importantly, what does it mean for the children that don't? Because a lot of wealth these days is tied up in property. So if all the wealth is in the property in the business, how do you separate that to provide for the other children that you want to, if they don't want to be in that business? And that's all part of that thought process in documenting and planning for that transition of business ownership.
Absolutely. Look, I'll just say too, I've noticed a couple of people have liked what we've been talking about. Anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question, please, on Facebook, please just go in and put a question in underneath the live stream, and if we see it come up, we'll certainly try and answer it for you.
That's a good sign. If we've got some likes, it's better to have thumbs up than thumbs down, isn't it? If we're going, we're off to a good start.
So far. Look, the second question probably leads perfectly into the third: procrastination based around time, cost, and complexity of succession conversation. So around the perceived level of simplicity or complexity, cost, how do you make it cost effective, and briskness. so on. And your thoughts here?
Yeah, we've discussed previously, like as I just said not long ago, it's not high on everyone's list to start with. So procrastination is also because it's not fun to a lot of people to talk about it. It's an unfortunate necessity, I suppose. It doesn't have to be hard. So as far as complexity goes, if you have a good advisor, then it just does not have to be hard. If you're clear on what the process will be, on what the cost will be, what the time frame will be, and all those things, you should know straight up. If you don't know that from the first time you meet your advisors and talk about this, then you've got every right to ask. So
Sure.
I think some people have bad experiences before, but really, those things are things that shouldn't have to be so. Like, it shouldn't have to be over complex, or you should be able to see the value in what you want and get the choice to make decisions based on that knowledge. So I guess procrastination.
Do you want to think about that?
Well, yeah, I'll procrastinate.
That was my joke for the day.
Yeah, I think with the right advisors, it's a worry that you shouldn't need to have.
Absolutely. I was just thinking about the conversation I had yesterday with these people down south, and they've had two bad experiences and bad results from people that they've seen in the past. So to them, this has now become very complex, very costly, and it's taking forever to get it solved. So there's really something to be said there for making sure you look for testimonials for people that have they've worked with in the past, and see what sort of results that advisors, so to speak, in this area have achieved for their clients. Next one: requirements of fairness versus equality in estate matters. So, thoughts?
Well, we know that fair doesn't always mean equal. Equal doesn't always mean fair, and this is a real tough one often for clients to get their head around, because do you just leave an estate equally between the children, or not necessarily children, your relatives, your family, your neighbours, whoever you want to leave your estate to. But obviously different people have different needs, different beneficiaries have done things for you. So it's really a thought process as to what you want to achieve with your estate planning. But I think the bottom line, as we often say, Mark, is fair doesn't necessarily mean equal. So there's lots of different things that can come into play there. And of course, then the whole aspect that we have touched on about potential estate litigation becoming a huge growth area, that's relevant there too, in deciding how an estate's left.
Absolutely, and we've dealt with plenty of clients in the past where one person may have been involved in the business for 10, 15, 20 years. The other two siblings have been off, as I throw away, sometimes backpacking around Europe and having a great time. And when they come home and say, well, okay, what's in it for me? It wouldn't be fair if the estate was divided in three, or that whoever was taking over the business was still accountable to their other two siblings. So, you've got a whole range of issues here. It's not just about quantum in regard to, what's fair from a quantum point of view. It's making sure that you don't force children to have to work together. As much as the idea of, I want all my kids to work together and take over my business, that just never works. So, 99.9% of the time. So you've got to create independence and make sure that if you do leave one kid with the farm, you're not hamstringing them by restrictions that the other siblings or power they may have over his decision making or her decision making.
Yeah, you want your children to move on and be able to live their own lives, and also different children and beneficiaries have different needs, such as different medical needs. They may have dependents that are dependent on them, so all sorts of other little things too. It's not just about who's stayed on the farm and who's gone backpacking. Each to their own.
Sure.
But there's other personal aspects too. Yeah. I'm all for backpacking.
Good on you. Okay, the next one is effectively and currently structured documentation, and that's really what we call I refer to this many times as be sure you don't have delinquent documents.
Yep.
Those that are out of date and not relevant anymore. And for most people, that's probably their wills that were done 10, 15 or 20 years ago.
Yep.
So, you know, having a method of checking up on those, and so just asking people how would they rate themselves in regard to, you know, what audit do you do? And that's part of your due diligence is obviously checking all these sorts of things, but making sure your documents are up to date. I can see you busting to say something.
I think the key question is here, when did you last review them? So
Yes.
if you haven't reviewed them for 20 years and they're gathering dust in the bottom drawer of your desk, then you are going to get a 1 for that. But you know, hopefully, you know, you review them every couple of years or on significant changes or events. It may be that you don't need to change them, but they should be reviewed. And as you point out there, it's a suite of documentation. It's not just a will. So do you have those different types of documents that we spoke about in a previous session, wills, enduring powers of attorney, binding death benefit nominations, deeds for trusts, etc. So do you have all the relevant suite of documents to your scenario? Yeah,
absolutely. And a great way to check those is to do a due diligence report, which you guys certainly do. And look, if everything's fine, even if they're 10 years old and they're perfectly good still, well, at least you've got peace of mind of knowing that everything's going to be okay instead of wondering. Next one, intergenerational conflict. And look, this comes in all sorts of forms, and we've probably talked about this already today, but that there's a measure. And that's what I'm asking people to do here, is to say, you know, how is the communication between the grandparents, the parents, the kids, grandkids? You know, is there any intergenerational conflict? And 99, well, I'll say 95 times out of 100 there is, isn't it?
Yes, there is. Yeah, and I think it's important to realise that different generations just may have different views on values and wealth and business and succession, and that's not right or wrong. It's just a fact. So, and, you know, that potentially will cause that intergenerational conflict.
Yeah, and look, there's only one thing that solves it, and that's conversations and communication. And sometimes, once again, sometimes you need someone from outside the family to come along and start the conversation, because it's no one's fault. I mean, if that's the way you were brought up, not to talk about stuff, then it's not your fault. It's just
it is what it is. Yeah,
it's who you are, and it's the way you've learned to deal with things. But you know, just saying, in days that we're in now, you need to open up the lines of communication, because people have the next generation need to be able to make their choices too. And if they're not game to talk to mum and dad, and they can't see what the future is, it's very hard to not have some form of conflict. And conflict doesn't mean that people are up there fighting each other, or, you know, with fisticuffs or bloody headlocks. It just means that sometimes conflict can be silence. It can be lack of, you know, it can be people withdrawing, not talking, moving to the city. It can be a whole range of different things.
Yeah.
The next one that's very important to me is what I was referring to before with the narcissistic daughter-in-law, was protecting assets, protecting wealth, and protecting intergenerational prosperity. Because I'm yet to meet anyone that works their backside off for their life out of their generosity and their want, they hand it down to their children. I haven't met anyone yet that wants any failed marriages to walk away with, you know, a few $1 million of their hard-earned money just because proper planning wasn't done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things here in this section, Mark, is that people probably don't know what they don't know, and don't know what they can do to protect against scenarios. But of course, you know, we've listed there some of the not pleasant scenarios, like relationship breakdowns and bankruptcy, etc.
Sure.
But the early death of family members is an interesting one, because the scenario there is, if you left your wealth to your let's say son, for example, had a wonderful marriage, doing great, but died young, unfortunately and accidentally, it would be almost not unusual to expect that he would leave his wealth to his children, to his family. So all of a sudden that family wealth has gone sideways. and that young spouse might remarry, might have another blended family, as they have every right if their spouse died young.
Sure.
So that's just a life situation where you might see a family's bloodline go out of the bloodline, the wealth go out of the bloodline for not a bad or unfortunate, of course it's a bad or unfortunate situation, but nothing, not like a bankruptcy or a divorce, but just an unexpected happening. And by providing those structures, those structures, we can give some asset protection around that for those scenarios that you don't ever want to think about.
Look, absolutely, and it's not so much if Johnny, as you're talking about the son, if Johnny's happy marriage and there's 3 kids and everybody's going along swimmingly and there's a great relationship and the daughter-in-law, and the parents get on really well, it's, no one's saying don't look after that person, but I mean, if suddenly you dump $5 million, into her hands and it's not done properly, there's a chance that eventually she's going to remarry, and she might remarry someone with 5 kids, and that's the issue. It's then all the stepkids and so on. When for most people, and it doesn't have to be, we're not dictating or judging, but I mean, for most people, they'd want their wealth to eventually go down to their grandchildren, not to someone else's. Not to someone else's children that have come along. So it's a matter of, and you're right, the unknown unknowns. Most people don't understand how this works, how they need to be protected, and what they can do to protect themselves.
And I think the important thing here is knowing your options and then making an informed decision.
Everyone's situation is different. So absolutely right. Final one is, how would you rate yourself in regard to issues around control, experience, and delegation? When's the time for the patriarch or matriarch to hand control, decision-making, to the next generation in some or all areas of the business? And we're talking with clients, so, just bit by bit, if you're finding it hard to let go of the reins and, if you say you still want to die with your boots on and be involved, over time, you're not going to be able to do all the physical things the way you used to be able to do them. But so what are some of the things you can let go, some of the decision making you can let go early in the piece to sort of work towards the eventual transition? How would
this
you
sort
rate
of circles,
there?
circles back up to the top, doesn't it, Mark? It's all about that communication and
the
the documented plan. Yeah. And this is something you would see all the time, I would imagine, in your travels, Mark. It's something that would be hugely common, I would guess.
Look, absolutely. And, the truth is, when I put this form together, I was really at ends as to whether to call it the intergenerational communication matrix or the intergenerational conflict matrix, because, it's yin and yang in some ways. It's because of the lack of conflict. It's because of the lack of communication that the conflict exists. So, conflict comes up in all 8 areas here because of communication. And it's just a matter of, how do we help people? And that's the point, I guess, is I'm going to tell you right now, whoever's watching this and looking at the scorecard here, if you're scoring 1 to 3s, or, maximum 4 to 6s, you're normal. You're absolutely normal. Please don't, please don't feel that we're not having a go or judging you here, because, most people that I've met over 30 odd years of doing this would score themselves 1 to 3 in just about every area here. And it's very normal. So, the point we're trying to do here by highlighting these issues is say, well, okay, you can never make progress in life until you tell the truth and draw a line in the sand. And so you have to sort of say, okay, this is where we are, and it's okay. Most of the population or more are in the same boat. But at least then, if you identify them, you can say, okay, now how do we start the communication? How do we eliminate the conflict? How do we create family harmony? And a lot of times it just starts because people don't know where to start, who to talk to, how to do it. They don't know the unknown. They don't know what they don't know, and so nothing happens. And that's a great joy. You and I would get, Juanita, is that when we get the opportunity to speak to people about stuff like this, is being able to transition them from the first column to the end column, and that's the greatest joy I get in my life, is being able to create that peace of mind for people by helping them to move across the page.
Yeah, and I think it's a really this matrix is a great way of just turning your mind to once you see that current score, and as you said, Mark, totally normal to see most people in the first two columns. To get to where you want, what little areas there that can you nail, can you drill down on to help move move across and help things move in a positive manner?
Yeah, and the most obvious thing in life is that, often we can't see things ourselves. We don't know how to fix them ourselves because it's not what we do. You need someone else to come in from outside who can see things more clearly than you can see when you're in it yourself, and also someone who's got some experience and knows how to help you make that transition and that transformation. So
yeah, I've seen similar situations many times before and can use that experience to help the process.
Absolutely. Juanita, thanks. I can't believe the half hour's up already, but thank you. Thanks for the conversation today.
Thanks, Mark.
No one, they must have been all paying attention because there's no comments down the side. Well, you must have been explaining it perfectly, so thank you.
Let's hope so. Great to chat.
We look forward to catching up again next week, everybody, and thanks, Juanita. Appreciate it.
Thank you.